Mabel McFiggins, a destitute Rochester woman who has been immortalized on the internet as the first American ever to receive government food stamps. As it turns out, Rochester was the test bed for our nation's first government-run food stamp program. They were doled out at what is now known as City Hall. The year was 1939. The Great Depression was over, but the economy had faltered again towards the end of the 1930s, and unemployment had shot back up towards 20%. The administration of President Franklin D. Roosevelt devised a food stamp program to help unemployed people pay for food and to help farmers by purchasing surplus production that otherwise would depress prices. The administration chose to roll out its food stamp plan in Rochester, then again as populous as it is now and much more prominent on the national scene. On May 16th of that year, 2,000 people queued at 30 Church Street, which was the federal office building in those days, to apply for and receive their food stamps. It was relatively a simple program. Applicants who were out of work and desperately poor already were receiving small relief stipends from the government. They could use some of that money. The food stamp sales was held on that day after the relief checks were delivered. Not by coincidence, to buy a limited number of orange-colored food stamps. These could be spent at grocery stores on food and household staple items. For each dollar of orange stamps purchased, the applicant also was given 50 cents worth of blue stamps, which could then be redeemed for select surplus food items such as flour, eggs, and vegetables. Just as the name Mabel McFiggins survived decades later, so does orange as the color representing food stamps and freedom from hunger. The Rochester Regional Food Hub, FoodLink, and sister group Nationwide use orange in their Hunger Action Month campaigns each September to publicize the campaign. FoodLink, number one, urged folks to wear orange every Thursday in September. This being the final Thursday in September, I'm wearing orange. How about you? In May of 1939, too, orange with blue were the colors of choice as people thronged to the federal building. The first day was, by accounts, quite a spectacle. The place was packed. Dignitaries and Washington stood by as newspaper photographers and newsreel camera operators elbowed each other out of the way. Quote, food stamp test launched. United States watches city triumphed. A spot usually was reserved for national news. Another headline called the day historic, and the third said it was hailed as a success. The paper said stories about poor people salivating at the thought of eating fresh vegetables again, and an Enterprise scribe went to the Hart store. Yes, one of the nominal forerunners of the news, Hart's local groceries in East End, to record the moment when Keith Hughes rushed in with a fistful of stamps and a, quote, voluble store of praise for this new food stamp business. Hughes went and spent $1.65 on butter, beans, grapes, and oranges. But the reporters and photographers paid their closest attention to the first in line, a party somewhat surprised to be at the head of the parade and thus destined, as the Time Union put it, quote, to some historical fame as the first person in the country to purchase food stamps. But it wasn't Mabel McFiggins around whom the Fourth Estate gathered that Tuesday morning. It was Ralston Thayer. To be sure, Mabel McFiggins was there. She was the first woman in line, according to the Times Union and several other newspapers, and was as sympathetic a figure as the next Rochesterian. A 6-year-old, she was a tiny, timid person who had been on relief for 3 years, ever since her mother died and left Mabel penniless. She once worked in a button factory but developed arthritis in her hand and could never work again. The Times Union reported, quote, I want to get butter and eggs. I like the grapefruit too, especially the juice. Prunes are good. Everything they give you is good. They're very nice to me. How Mabel McFiggins supplemented Ralston Thayer in the annals of welfare is a mystery, but she did. Even the New York Times and the federal agency that now runs the food stamp program thinks she was the bellwether. As for poor Ralston Thayer, you can find him in a few dusty corners of the internet, but only if you know where to look. Otherwise, proof he was never there, but he was. 36-year-old and unemployed machinist and veteran of the Great War, he was amiable but apparently taciturn. The New York Times, the Times Union, didn't provide a single quote from the man. Perhaps if Mr. Thayer did say more, he had been immortalized instead of Miss McFiggins. Some 18,000 worth of orange and blue food stamps were sold and given away that May 16th to Down at the Hills Rochester residents, and the program was immediately declared a success by its administration. James Allen, who witnessed the kickoff and described it as a nice turn of phase, quote, "It is in reality an attack on want in the midst of plenty." Ida Mae Fuller was the first beneficiary of reoccurring monthly Social Security payment program. Ms. Fuller, known as Aunt Ida to her friends and family, was born on September 6, 1874, on a farm outside of Ludlow, Vermont. She attended school in Rutland, Vermont, where one of her classmates was Calvin Coolidge. In 1905, after working as a school teacher, she became a legal secretary. One of the partners in the firm, John G. Sargent, would later become Attorney General in the Coolidge administration. Ida Mae never married and had no children. She lived alone most of her life, but spent 8 years near the end of her life living with her niece, Hazel Perkins, and her family in Brattleboro, Vermont. Ms. Fuller filed her retirement claim on November 4th of 1939, having worked under Social Security for a little short of 3 years. While running an errand, she dropped by the Rutland Social Security office to ask about possible benefits. She would later observe, quote, "It wasn't that I expected anything, mind you, but I knew I'd been paying for something called Social Security, and I wanted to ask the people in Rutland about it." Her claim was taken by the claims clerk, Elizabeth Corcoran Burke, and transmitted to the Claims Division in Washington, D.C. for adjudication. The case was adjudicated and reviewed and sent to the Treasury Department for payment in January of 1940. The claims were grouped in batches of 1,000, and a certification list for each batch was sent to the Treasury. Miss Fuller's claims was the first one of that first certification list, and so the first Social Security check number 00-000-001, was issued to Ida Mae Fuller in the amount of $22.54 and dated January 31st, 1940. So the reason I wanted to bring this story or stories directly to the forefront is because these were things that were never taught. And I can attest to the fact that I never knew anything about these two women who more than likely are both Caucasian. Of course, you can obviously see one, and then with the other woman with her name McFiggins, you can obviously tell it had nothing to do with Black Americans at all. Zero. And they always like to state that when it deals with these government assistance programs, it doesn't matter for Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps, all these other types of things, they want to make the poster children Black people. At one point in time during administration, they called Black women welfare queens, but clearly that is not the case. Black women were not the ones firstly on this. They were not the ones to start this. They weren't the ones asking questions. They were not even the first ones directly in line in order to reap the benefits from the first individuals who were able to be on any of these programs. It was clear-cut white Americans, but clearly white Americans must have forgot. White Americans did not want to own up to being the first to even ask or be on any of these programs, the way that they always like to say that, oh, you know, we founded this country, we modernized this country, we did this and we did this, we have a lot of firsts for everything out here, right? This is a major first. Instead of being fixated and focused on Black people, why are you not focused on a lot of these individuals who made it the main thing to be, right? You had McFiggins and you had Ida. Both of these women were able to be the some odd first of individuals to be directly on these programs. In one instance, you also had a white male that was more than likely one of the first males that was on this government assistance, being able to get fresh goods and food and this and that. But, you know, I guess he didn't want to be highlighted, and he didn't want to say much because of how ashamed that he was that he as a man had to have help directly from the government instead of depending on what it is that he is able to do for himself. I'm pretty sure that's why he stayed back, why he did not want to be marked down in history, and allowed the white woman to be the first one named and listed as the first ever individual that was directly on this. Very interesting. And it's very interesting how you don't hear about these things in history class. You don't hear about this in government. Even in college courses, this was not something that was specifically taught at all. And I can for sure tell you that a lot of the migrants, those who are from Africa or any of the melanated areas, when they come here and they decide to call Black Americans lazy and say that all we do is this and all we do is that and we're on this and we're on that, I promise you, I can bet you $100 that they know nothing about this history at all. And even if they did, they'll still come up with some excuse to body block for those individuals who were the first ever to be on that system. It's crazy how that works. But anyways, let me know what you guys think about this video and everything that I stated in the comment description below. And as always, peace, love, and stay tuned for the next video.